USS Enterprise, a name bestowed upon a long line of ships that have helped forge the history of the United States Navy. Through the years, a variety of vessels have been christened Enterprise, with each one carrying on the proud traditions of those who came before them: duty, honor, and country. On January 14th, 1969, an explosion rocks the flight deck of the aircraft carrier Enterprise during a combat readiness drill. It begins a sequence of events that nearly cost the U.S. Navy its most famous ship.
We had 18 detonations of weapons in 15.5 minutes. Each one cut people down. The hoses were always manned. People would come in and carry those other guys away.
As I was moving in, I was thinking about saving the ship, because if the ship went, we went, and I wasn't ready to go.
What do you do when the real thing happens? Because they had said, and I'll never forget, this is no drill, and we do it.
This ship is USS Enterprise, the first nuclear carrier, the only ship in its class. It had the greatest name in the history of the United States Navy. And on that day, 14 January 1969, was the day that she earned her name in blood.
This is the story of untold heroes. The story of fighting a merciless enemy that has no heartbeat and no soul. It's the story of a trial by fire.
Enterprise is a pretty famous ship with respect to the history that we have. This is the 8th USS Enterprise. The very first one was 1775. Probably the one with the most famous history was the Enterprise of World War II fame that had over 900 aircraft shot down during World War II between the ship and the air wing, and over 70 ships sunk. So a tremendous combat record.
The first aircraft carrier to be called USS Enterprise was the 7th ship to carry on the Navy's Enterprise name. They called her the Big E. 4 years of continuous service in the Pacific during World War II earned her 20 battle stars. This fighting Gray Lady saw action from the very first day of the war with Japan in December 1941 through the assault on Okinawa in May of 1945. She was decommissioned on February 17th, 1947. Today's USS Enterprise is the 8th U.S. Navy ship to be called Enterprise.
USS Enterprise that we're on board today has been in commission since 1961 and is due to remain in service until the year 2013, so over 52 years of service to the country.
This latest Enterprise is 1,123 feet long, almost 4 football fields, and 300 feet longer than the previous Enterprise. It is still one of the longest warships in the United States Navy, and even at 90,000 tons, is among the fastest.
It's a very busy environment here. It's a city plus. There's something, especially at sea, something going on 24 hours a day, and the folks who make it happen are those sailors on board. 3,000 ship's company plus the 2,000 from the air wing, so 5,000 people that make this magic work. And it's a truly amazing engineering feat to see a ship that can go 30 plus knots, that can launch and recover aircraft and do it in virtually any type of weather, and to the uneducated eye make it look very easy.
By the end of 1968, the Enterprise had already served 3 combat tours off the coast of North Vietnam. On January 13th, 1969, preparations are underway for the Enterprise to return to Vietnam. 8 squadrons are on board, made up of about 80 aircraft. But first, there will be a 3-day operational readiness inspection, known as an ORI. This extensive exercise will take place about 70 miles southwest of Pearl Harbor. Every aspect of the ship's operations will be scrutinized, then graded by a team of 102 outside observers.
My name is Jack Greer. On 14 January 1969, I was a lieutenant. I came aboard as an observer to perform a mass casualty drill for the ship's crew and the medical department, and conduct various gradings of the treatment of the casualties that we were going to impose upon the crew.
Jack Greer had been in the Navy about 9 years. After being commissioned in 1965, he became an applied aviation physiologist, an expert on how the human body works and reacts. This was his 10th time as an ORI observer.
My name is Bob McLaughlin. I was a lieutenant assigned to Patrol Squadron 17 at Barbers Point, Hawaii, and I was assigned to the Enterprise as an observer for the ORI inspection. And my job was here in primary flight control to observe flight ops, timing landings and launchings of the aircraft.
Primary flight control, or PRI-FLY, serves as the control tower for aircraft carriers. This vantage point offers one of the best views of the entire flight deck. The first day of the readiness inspection ends well after midnight on the 13th. The following day will start very early and consist of 15 hours of flying. Captain Kent L. Lee, commanding officer of the Enterprise, knows he will be demanding a lot from his crew. This will be his second consecutive tour off the coast of Vietnam.
We were very well trained in damage control. Captain Lee, we didn't particularly care for it at the time, but we had lots of general quarters and lots of drills.
In 1969, Lieutenant J.G. Lash Hansborough is assigned to the No. 4 propulsion plant, which includes 2 nuclear reactors. Along with providing the power to turn one of the 4 giant propellers, his area supplies parts of the carrier with electricity and water for the fire mains.
We drilled constantly, and I drilled my people when the ship wasn't having drills because of our critical job.
Warrant Officer Jim Helton is the crash salvage officer and the assistant flight deck officer. He is one of the men who performs safety checks on the flight deck before launch sequences can begin.
If a plane crashes and there's no fire, our crew would remove the pilot from the plane and get him to safety. If there was a fire, they would put the fire out and then remove him from the plane and get him to safety. And that was our main function.
As dawn approaches on the morning of January 14th, the first 16 of the day's 130 scheduled strike missions are in the air. The time is 6:55. By 8:05, the pilots for the second launch are arriving on the busy flight deck. At 8:15, startup of the 16 combat-ready aircraft begins. To start the planes, the Navy uses what they call a huffer, a multi-purpose tow vehicle with a gas turbine engine mounted on the back. Petty Officer 3rd Class, Frank Neumeyer, is the plane captain for aircraft number 113, an F-4 Phantom still waiting for its startup. His duty is to oversee the preparation and maintenance of his assigned aircraft.
We were getting ready for the second launch of the morning, and we had Phantoms lined up across the fantail. My aircraft is right here at the far port side, and I was on 113. We were loaded with about everything we could carry as far as 500-pounders, fuel, and rockets and missiles. And I had my pilots in, everybody was ready to go, and I was trying to signal up the deck to get a huffer to come back and get me started. And they were having some problems on 105, and I finally got the huffer to come around and come in my way, and boom.
I just come up to the to pry fly, and I was talking to the air boss who was seated behind me, and we were just having a casual conversation when one of the Phantoms that was starting up actually blew up. There was a large ball of fire and an explosion, and that started a chain of events of fires from both fuel and ordnance on the flight deck.
All I remember is this huge flash, like 1,000 flash bulbs going off in my face. All I could think about was hit the deck. And as I put my hands over my eyes, and I spun around, and I was going down on the deck.
The blast catches everyone by surprise. The time is 8:19 and 26 seconds. 20 seconds later, the warheads of 3 Zuni rockets, which had been knocked loose by the first explosion from 105 and are pointed downward, explode, penetrating the deck. Jet fuel from the punctured tanks of 105 begins pouring through the holes into the crew quarters below. At first, there is mayhem, but as the shock subsides, the daunting reality hits the Enterprise crew.
I had no idea what was happening. But I knew there was a fire and my job was to fight fires, so training sent me into action.
All of the deck crewmen that were getting ready to launch those aircraft were standing around preparing the airplanes for flight, as well as ordnancemen arming the weapons, and so there was a lot of people right in the midst of the explosions that were injured and killed initially.
At this point, no one knows what caused the explosions. The crew quickly begins to take action. The fire must be contained. This is not a simple task for several reasons. The first explosion has ruptured the gas tanks of 105, releasing 2,600 gallons of highly flammable JP-5 jet fuel across the deck and into the catwalks that run along the edge of the deck. Shrapnel and debris from the first blast have also blown holes in many of the aircraft on the back end of the ship. Thousands of gallons of jet fuel pours from F-4 fighters, A-7 attack bombers, and a tanker, feeding the flames as it spreads across the entire back end of the flight deck. Most of the planes on the flight deck are ready to launch for a bomb run as part of the ORI drill. So they are fully loaded with 20mm cannon rounds, rocket pods, Sparrow missiles, and 500-pound bombs. As the fire spreads and temperatures rise, the heated explosives are in danger of cooking off and blowing up at any moment. Captain Lee appears on the bridge soon after the first set of explosions. He assesses the urgency of the situation and sounds general quarters. 6 levels below the flight deck, in number 4 propulsion plant, Lieutenant J.G. Lash Hansborough is going over his ORI assignment with the reactor officer.
All of a sudden, there was this loud whoop. And being on an aircraft carrier, you hear hard landings where a plane comes in harder than it usually would. So the 4 of us were standing there, and we heard this whoop, and Commander Kellogg said, "I don't like the sound of that one," and walked over to the engineering duty officer and said, "Let's get some more fire pumps up on the line." And we were starting to go over the general quarters drill outlook again, and all of a sudden there was this big whang or a bang or something like that. And at that time, we knew there was something really wrong, but we didn't know what.
Meanwhile, up on the flight deck, Frank Neumeyer regains consciousness, only to find himself surrounded by flames and thick black smoke.
I was laying face down, and I had my glove on this hand, but my shirt was on fire here, and I felt fire on my back. So my instinct was to just roll over on my back, put the fire out, and I put out the fire on my arm, but I couldn't see very well. What had happened is the flash had melted the goggles against my face. So I peeled off the goggles and then I could see better. And I noticed a wall of flame coming at me, and it was probably maybe 10 feet out. And I looked and I kind of assessed how bad I was hit. My left leg went down to the knee and turned back and came straight back up the other side and was twisted. It was grotesque. But I didn't have any pain, and I knew that I was bad.
As the fire closes in, a strange calm suddenly takes over the injured plane captain.
The fire hadn't got to me yet. I did notice the sky was blue, though. I noticed a little patch of blue sky, but the roar of the fire was just horrendous. It just blotted out any other sound. The stench was horrible. Just a burnt, spent smell. The air was stifling, couldn't hardly breathe it. I laid there and couldn't do much for myself, and I couldn't figure anybody could help me. It was just a wall of fire in this back aft corner, and the only thing that hadn't been touched by the fire yet was my aircraft. And I figured I'd had it. Fire was going to get me. So I just started to pass out. Figured that'd be the easiest way to go. My main concern was how my mother was going to handle it when she got the news. I passed out and just sort of let go and figured that was it. Made peace with my God. In my unconsciousness, a loud voice kept yelling at me, screaming at me to wake up, wake up. And so for the second time, I jolted awake. And by that time, the fire had got to me. It was, had reached my pool of blood. That was a horrible sound. Fire hitting the blood. Fire had engulfed everything, and I was just in this little tiny hole here. And I knew the only way out of here was right through here. Started to close my eyes, and I saw movement. And what it was I saw two guys, and I figured, well, this is it. If I'm going to get out of here at all, at least this is my only chance. So with everything I had, I rolled over on my stomach and I just started clawing and elbowing my way. And I moved over right here to the scupper rail. I must have crawled about 10, 15 feet. And I kept watching them out of my eye. And when they got right about here, I just threw myself over on top of them. And were just a pile of bodies right here.
The two men are Jim Ridenauer, or Rhino, and a wounded Randy Lorimer. Both are plane captains from Frank's squadron, VF-96, known as the Fighting Falcons. After realizing what has hit them, the men quickly take off their belts and form a tourniquet on each of Frank's legs. They then climb down the ladder and carry a semi-conscious Frank Neumeyer inside the ship.
And we headed down with Rhino in the lead, and we went inboard and to get out of here, because this was probably within, I would say within 15 seconds from the time we got inside, this was engulfed.
At 8:23, a little more than 3.5 minutes after the initial explosion, two 500-pound bombs detonate under aircraft 105, just 10 yards from where Frank Neumeyer had been laying on the deck. The ferocious blast punches an 8-foot by 7-foot hole in the 2.5-inch thick armor-plated flight deck, which is built to withstand a 500-pound bomb dropped from any altitude.
We came through this passageway. As soon as we got over this bulkhead right here, massive explosion. It must have been the 500-pounders on 105 went off, and the whole bulkhead just sucked in to where it was in a foot from the other side, and it just sent us tumbling right here. If we'd have been a few more feet forward, we'd have been crushed. We'd all three been crushed.
Blast debris carries down through 3 levels, inflicting many casualties along the way. These new holes also allow more burning jet fuel to pour directly into the decks below.
My name is Mike Carlin. On 14 January 1969, I was the crew leader of Crew 2 of the flight deck fuels gangs, purple shirts. And our duty was fueling aircraft. Crash salvage was your initial fire response team, but all flight deck people were firefighters.
The crew of the Enterprise had learned valuable lessons from a fire that had taken place aboard another aircraft carrier, the USS Forrestal, on July 29, 1967. During that devastating event, 134 men died and 100 more were wounded.
And because of what happened on Forrestal, where their crash salvage people were wiped out with the first bomb that went off, you had to have all hands be involved in this. And fleet-wide, I think, it became a requirement that all personnel, especially Air Department squadron personnel, flight deck people, had to be intensively trained in firefighting.
At 8:23 and 40 seconds, another 500-pound bomb goes off, this time under aircraft 103, an F-4 parked on the starboard side of the ship. 8 seconds later, multiple 500-pounders blow a 13 by 16-foot hole through the flight deck under aircraft 113, Frank Neumeyer's F-4. This blast sends an unexploded 500-pound bomb tearing through the decks below, exiting at the ship's fantail, only 3 feet above the waterline.
The force of these explosions blew down through the ship, some of them all the way down to the waterline. And as it opened the ship up, where you could drive your car through these holes, and naturally all the fuel from the flight deck is draining down through these holes as far down as it can go, and it's on fire, and it's firing the interior of the ship, and this whole ship is burning up. And you have to fight. You have to fight. There's no place to go.
Despite the crew's effort to battle the blaze, problems keep mounting. Communication lines have been destroyed, and fire mains are continually being blown apart, so coordinating the firefighting is difficult. To make matters worse, deadly shrapnel is taking its toll in a variety of ways.
As soon as we started getting water on that fire, other explosions started. So people were getting blown down, and that's when we started suffering casualties. And as we fought on, we lost fire main pressure. We didn't have any water. Then we got the water back on, and hoses ruptured. So we were getting pretty desperate.
There was no lights, there was no communication, and the flames that were getting into the interior of the ship, now they're filling the whole ship up with smoke. And that's a big problem. You have to get rid of the smoke, because smoke kills too.
The flaming JP-5 is also pouring over the edges of the flight deck, as well as through the graded surface of aircraft elevators 3 and 4. This sets the elevator wells in the machinery room on fire, putting the hangar deck and therefore the entire ship in serious jeopardy.
I'm Jim Girafaco. I was a seaman apprentice in 1st Division as part of Deck Division, January 14th, 1969. We started hearing explosions, and we saw the fantail of the ship was black with smoke and orange flames shooting out. I thought I was in a vortex of hell. We didn't know what was going on because a piece of a bomb went through the island, cut all the communications, knocked out the water supply. We had no water up here, we had no communications. We didn't know what was going on. We just saw the fire creeping closer and closer to the island.
The island contains the bridge and pry fly and is the center of operations. It becomes extremely vulnerable when blast debris cuts its water main. Captain Lee knows if he loses the island, or if the hangar deck catches fire, which contains more aircraft fully loaded with ordnance, he will lose the ship. As part of the standard operating procedure during general quarters, all watertight doors are closed and sealed until further notice, essentially locking the crews into assigned areas. If water, fire, or smoke somehow breaches a sealed compartment, it will be contained there. The sailors in those spaces cannot open zebra hatches without the permission of Damage Control Central.
My name's King Marandino. On January 14th, 1969, I was an airman apprentice assigned from VF 96 TAD to the ship's laundry.
As General Quarters sounds, King runs from his berthing area to his temporary assigned duty station, the laundry. He arrives just as the zebra hatch is being closed.
It seems like within a few seconds, the lights went out, explosion, flames and smoke through the ventilation system. There's probably 20 or 30 of us gathered in the foyer outside the laundry space. Guys were on the ladder. We were trying to get the guys above us to understand there was no water coming in this compartment and to let us out.
A repair party is directly above, and it is their duty to protect the watertight integrity of the ship.
There was a little yelling and screaming to let us the heck out of the space because we knew there was no water in the space. But the concern from the people above was not to open that hatch. Should there be flooding from below, they would have sacrificed the people in that space in order to save the ship. People were actually turning the scuttle from below, and they were tightening it back down as soon as you loosen it up. So we didn't really know what was happening, but we knew we wanted to get out of that space because it filled up with smoke. If we'd stayed down there much longer, we probably wouldn't have made it.
I was scared to death. Well, we had to stay here. This was our battle station. We couldn't leave, even if we wanted to. And we had heard that the fire was starting at the flight deck and coming up. And we were scared. We were trapped up here. We couldn't leave if we wanted to, unless we jumped over, and that would have been suicide.
My name is John Plummer, and I was Petty Officer 3rd Class. I was a gunner's mate on the USS Rogers on the day that the Enterprise caught fire. And we were about 50 miles out of Pearl Harbor, and the Enterprise was off to the port side about 2 nautical miles, and we heard a muffled explosion. And then we noticed a fireball explosion on the flight deck. And at that time, the petty officer and I ran up to the bridge of our ship, the Rogers, in just total disbelief because we didn't understand what was going on.
With the fate of the Enterprise hanging in the balance, the Rogers commanding officer, Captain George Hart, orders his ship into harm's way. Fire hoses are lashed to the barrels of the 5-inch guns as the Rogers pulls dangerously close alongside the giant carrier. Running parallel, they use their hoses to try and reach the fire raging on the deck of the Enterprise. Unfortunately, the wind and distance proves to be too much for the water to have any major effect.
It was horrifying. It had gone from just confusion to disbelief with the fire, and then the horrific view that we saw of the flight deck from down below. We were so close in that I thought for sure it was going to bend our antenna. There were certainly chunks of debris, jet, canopy, aluminum, parts of explosive devices that were flying over on our ship.
The Rogers was so close that their mast was almost hitting the side of the ship. I thought those guys on that deck with the hose were very brave.
We saw items being jettisoned that were on fire, individuals that were engulfed in flames that had gone over the side, and just chunks of debris. It was such a shock to realize that form that's on fire going over the ship was actually an individual. And then you didn't have time to really react to that. You were either on a fire hose or you were trying to duck the fragmentation that was coming over. You just moved on.
Back on the deck of the Enterprise, the men are still desperately fighting to save the ship. To help protect the island and stop the flames from spreading forward, the men create a fire break at elevator number 3 by moving aircraft to the forward part of the flight deck. One 37-ton bomber is pushed out by the sheer brute force of some determined crewmen. Others are towed out by a tractor.
We were trying to protect the island because planes were parked there fully loaded with fuel. And if those had gone, everybody in the island, the captain on the bridge, the air boss, all of those people would have been trapped and probably killed. So we were trying to move the planes, but the deck was slippery from all of the foam and water, so we were having a difficult time of it.
Jim Helton was right up front, and that was his job. It was his responsibility. He was a crash salvage officer. And a lot of us that got up on deck and got on these hose teams, you were so shocked by what you were seeing and the magnitude of it that you were not, you were kind of stunned, and you were taking your places, but you're not really doing what had to be done. And he was the one that had us put those hoses right onto those weapons. I mean, don't stop here and look at these flames. Come on, we got to get in here. And that's what he did.
At 9 o'clock, 40 minutes after the fiery ordeal begins, Crippler Army Hospital at Pearl Harbor receives word of the disaster aboard the Enterprise. They immediately initiate their mass casualty alert. Also around this time, the tide begins to turn on board the ship. Repairs to the water mains restores the pressure, making the hose teams more effective. In fact, the crew is stopping the advance of the flames and begins to reclaim small sections of the flight deck from the fire. The men have been battling back the flames for a solid hour. They are exhausted, but sense that they have made some headway against the raging inferno. Not until after the fires on the deck are out that the crew realizes there are holes allowing fuel and flames to wreak havoc below. Seeing this, the flight deck leading petty officer Billy Hawk, one of the hose team leaders, organizes foam teams to pour the extinguishing agent down through the open wounds of the carrier's flight deck. On the decks below, fires are being fought and contained, one compartment at a time. 35,000 gallons of JP-5 has fueled many fires, but so far, the planes on the hangar deck have eluded the flames. At around 10 o'clock, the first helicopter lands on the deck of the Enterprise. 46 of the most critically wounded men will be medevaced off the carrier over the next 3.5 hours. At 11:30 a.m., Central Control reports all fires are out. Captain Lee has already set a course to Pearl Harbor. Badly scarred but moving under her own power, the USS Enterprise heads back, thanks to the valiant effort of her well-trained crew who never give up the fight.
I think the thing I appreciated most after was when we pushed the last burned plane over the side and we knew it was over.
At 1:39 p.m., exactly 5 hours and 20 minutes after the first explosion, the crew of the USS Enterprise is secured from general quarters and released from battle stations. But the final devastation is great. 26 men are dead. 2 are missing and presumed dead. 343 men are wounded. 15 aircraft destroyed. There has been extensive damage to the most famous ship in the United States Navy, but she's still afloat, and she's headed for home.
We'd gotten all of the fires out, and everybody was trying to calm down and get their nerves together, so I went into flight deck control and got a cup of coffee, and I was trying to drink it, and I couldn't catch up with it because I just realized what I'd been through, and I was shaking all over the place. The aircraft handling officer said, "You better get to sick bay." And I says, "What for?" He says, "You got blood on you." And I says, "No, I was helping somebody and I got blood off them." And he says, "No, it's squirting out of your back." So I went down to sick bay, and there were so many casualties down there that were in worse shape than me that I tried to sneak back out. And the corpsman caught me and took me to the doctor, and he took care of the wounds.
While in sickbay, Jim Helton sees aviation boatswain's mate, Handler Second Class Henry Mendoza, a yellow shirt from his own V-1 division. His right leg had nearly been severed just above the knee by the very first explosion from 105.
And I saw him there on the stretcher. And I looked down and he said, "Boatswain," that's what they called me. And he said, "They're gonna cut my leg off." And I says, "No, Henry, they're not going to cut your leg off. And the doctor looked at me and he says, don't lie to him, we got to take the leg. And I think that's when the whole thing just came down on me.
I was given last rites twice on the ship and once at the hospital. It was kind of annoying.
Over the next few hours, Frank Neumeyer would fight for his life and win. In the end, he would lose his left leg, but with the help of his friends and a strong will to live, he has survived the day's terrible tragedy. But there are many heroes this day.
I was just terrifically amazed at how young people, we're talking the average age of a Vietnam vet at that time was like 19, but you're talking 18, 19, 20, 21-year-old individuals that could respond to a disaster of that magnitude and work in concert with each other and bring it down to being under control within 2 or 3 hours, totally under control.
Throughout the day, an extensive search and rescue operation is conducted with helicopters and ships. 4 survivors and 1 body are pulled from the water.
After the fire, we were only 75 miles from Pearl Harbor. When we came in, people were already aboard ship. They were flying them aboard, shipyard superintendents and Navy brass. And as soon as we tied up, work started, and they put them on round-the-clock shifts to put this ship back together and get us back into the war. And in 51 days, they had it put back together to where it was livable and fightable. There was a lot of things that were just ruined and they didn't get a chance to fix it. They just put us back together to where we could go back and finish our tour of duty in Vietnam. And we did.
And when we headed back to Vietnam, we were a little jumpy. Any slight bang or loud noise, everybody would flinch and look at each other and, oh no, here we go again. But we were a little nerve-wracking, but we got used to it.
On January 16th, 1969, just 2 days after the fire, an official investigation begins to determine the cause of the disaster aboard the Enterprise. It is discovered that the initial explosion originated from the 5-inch Zuni rocket pod of aircraft number 105, an F-4 Phantom on the port side of the ship. The 15 pounds of TNT inside each of the rocket's warheads had been overheated by the turbine exhausts of the Huffer parked only 18 inches away. No disciplinary action was taken against anyone on the ship. Instead, it was decided that failure of design was the real cause of the accident.
The Navy had several incidents that occurred on aircraft carriers. One was on Enterprise, one was Forstall, Oriskany was another. And a lot of lessons learned that were implemented to make the systems better. And we continue to refine things that occurred then to make sure that hopefully we'll never have one of those repeat because of what we learned. But if something does occur similar to that, our ability to combat it and drop it down, fire down rapidly has been increased, and we can minimize potential problems that would occur.
From May 1999 through early 2000, this storied ship, the 8th to carry one of the most well-known names in American military history, went through a nuclear refueling, a maintenance overhaul, and an extensive systems upgrade. After months of sea trials, the USS Enterprise once again takes its place among the active warships of the U.S. Navy, patrolling the seas, always on alert to make the world a safer, more secure place.
The effect of this type of event on an 18-year-old is tremendous because, you know, you're invincible. You think nothing can happen to me, and then you realize it can happen. It happened to people that I know in my unit, and you know, you wonder why it was them and not you.
It was hard to come here, you know. I never thought about Enterprise, because if I did, I usually cried.
I think the guys on the deck did an excellent job. They saved the ship.
I was so busy fighting fire, I didn't feel much of anything. I didn't feel anything till after it was all over. And then, like I said, I was a nervous wreck because I realized that I was still around and hadn't been injured that severely, and I could have been. But during the firefighting, I would wasn't aware of any emotions. I was just doing stuff.
For his courage, leadership, and devotion to duty during this horrific event, Chief Warrant Officer James Heldon received his second Navy Commendation Medal.
The crew of the Enterprise in 1969 did a tremendous job. I can't give any extra credit to any one person or any one group of people. The crew as a whole saved the ship.
That's the benefit of drills and training is you are on autopilot. When it happens, you don't have to stop and think, you just leap into action. You know what to do, you know how to do it, and they did it.
After that, I treated every drill like, man, this is going to happen, and you better be ready. And I was always an ultra strict grader. You know, I mean, if they didn't perform, they didn't do it, it was go back and drill.
The Enterprise is a great name. The Enterprise at one time was the only aircraft carrier in the Pacific during World War II that was operational. It alone stood against the Japanese and other enemies. They were gods to us, and we were humans. And were we good as, I mean, everybody told us we were good. We knew we were good. How good were we? We didn't really know. I can honestly say this after the fire, we knew.
It is a special ship. The name means an awful lot. It represents our Navy from almost the first day that our Navy came into existence. And I think it would be very nice to have that continue through as long as there's a U.S. Navy.
The USS Enterprise is still, I think, it's got the proudest name, the greatest name in our nation's naval history. And you have to live up to that. We had that legacy to live up to, just like the present crew that has, they know they have to step up to. And it's the name Enterprise itself that's so special in our Navy and its history. And hopefully there will always be an Enterprise in our Navy.